Hello, and welcome to the Westmoreland Museum of American Art's virtual programming. We want to begin our program with a statement of acknowledgments. The Westmoreland Museum of American Art is situated upon the traditional lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Monongahela, Delaware, Shawnee, and Seneca Cayuga peoples. We honor all of the indigenous nations and their land with great gratitude and acknowledge the genocide and continuous displacement of indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose labor built this country during the colonial era and beyond. We acknowledge the harm inflicted upon the indigenous communities and people of color across the country, which guides and inspires our work as a museum. Thank you for joining us for our virtual in conversation, the process of curating a museum exhibition virtually. The program you're about to experience is a virtual conversation with the museum's chief curator, Barbara Jones, and 4 of the University of Pittsburgh students who were involved in the concept development for the Pattern Makers exhibition and the selection of the artworks. The focus of this evening's program is on the advantages and challenges of curating virtually and will uncover the process behind creating an ultimately cohesive exhibition. Following the discussion, there will be a live Q&A with our speakers. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our guests this evening before we get to meet them. Emily Mazzola is a PhD candidate in the history of art and architecture at the University of Pittsburgh. She received her BA from Skidmore College, and MA from the University of Connecticut, and worked as a curatorial fellow at the Fitchburg Art Museum in Massachusetts. Her dissertation explores the history of the First Lady's collection at the Smithsonian Institution. Katie Loney is a PhD candidate in the history of art and architecture at the University of Pittsburgh. She received her BA from the University of Oregon and MA from Indiana University Bloomington, and helped curate Dig Where You Stand for the 57th Carnegie International. Her dissertation traces the global circulation of luxury goods in the late 19th and early 20th century. Janina Lopez is a PhD student in the history of art and architecture at the University of Pittsburgh. She received her BA from California State University, Sacramento. She has received a Hot Metal Bridge Post-Baccalaureate Fellowship and undertook an internship with public art nonprofit Monument Lab. Her research focuses on Latinx art, immigration, and social justice. Olivia Rutledge is an undergraduate senior at the University of Pittsburgh, completing a double major in the history of art and studio arts and a minor in museum studies. She has undertaken internships at the Susquehanna Art Museum and the Silver Eye Center for Photography. Her own artistic practice addresses themes of nostalgia and the self. All right, let's bring everybody on and get to meet them. All right, everyone's here. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, Mona. Hi, everyone Barbara. Out there.
All right, well, I'm going to take a step back and go off stage and leave it up to you, Barbara.
All right, thank you, Mona. Okay, hi, Emily, Katie, Olivia, and Janina. Nice to have you here. I wish you were here, actually, in the gallery with me, but you can see I'm in the gallery and we are still all remote. But this conversation can work that way, which is really great. So I'm just going to introduce the collaboration, and then we'll get right to the question. So this was a successful collaboration between the Westmoreland and the University of Pittsburgh's History of Art and Architecture Department. It was a curatorial practicum class, which we worked with Dr. Alex Taylor on during the fall 2020 semester. 12 students worked remotely under Dr. Taylor's direction to create 3 exhibition proposals that would be presented to the senior team of the Westmoreland, from which one would be chosen for a full-scale exhibition. They worked with Doug Evans, our Director of Collections and Exhibition Management, and they learned to use digital resources, which was our museum database, to analyze the museum collection, generate ideas for the exhibition, to apply their research in a collaborative way, to draft label texts that interpret the works of art, and to collaborate with fellow students to refine and finalize one of the exhibition proposals to create a full-scale exhibition. So to all four of you, I'd like to ask you to describe your individual experiences curating an exhibition remotely. And let's start, I have an order here, so it'll be Emily, Janina, Katie, and Olivia. If you can go in that order, please.
Hi, Barbara. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you to Mona as well. I actually was really lucky to be part of this experience. I'm no longer based in Pittsburgh, so this being a digital project allowed me to participate in a way that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. It also filled a really important knowledge gap for me. Most of my curatorial experience prior to working with this collaboration has been collection and studio visit based, which would basically mean that every show that I've helped create, I had a firsthand experience with the objects that we were working with in the show. But that's not really an authentic representation of how curators work, whether it's loan exhibitions or collections that are difficult to have access to. Curators have to work in a digital space or without their objects. So this was a really important learning experience for me that I'll definitely carry forward. And I think the other really important part of what this opportunity offered was that all of our future museum colleagues have had this experience, have been working digitally, and I think it'll have a lasting impact on the way that we practice curation. And so to be part of this kind of allows us to be part of a conversation and part of practices that we'll be probably working with for a very long time.
I think that's true. Okay, Katie. Sorry, I'm changing the order already. Janina, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I feel really lucky to have been a part of this as well. As Mona mentioned at the beginning, I'm kind of at the beginning of my PhD career, and I am not originally from the area. So it was really exciting to get to work with a local institution and kind of familiarize myself with that. And to echo what Emily just said about working digitally, because I agree. I think this is going to become more of the norm going forward. So having that experience so early on in my career has been really useful.
Great. Now, Katie.
So, yeah, thank you, Barbara, for this question and inviting us here tonight. To echo Janina and Emily, I think the importance of being able to do curatorial work in a digital space and atmosphere is something that we all really learned how to do, and we're kind of forced to do in this exhibition, and will be, I think, so much more important for curators in the future, moving forward. But thinking of your question and my kind of own individual experience with this specific exhibition, something else I was really excited about was this kind of open prompt you gave us as well. I think it's rare, at least in my own curatorial experience, to have the opportunity to come in and just be like, explore the collection and give us an idea, and it can be anything. It's a really exciting thing that's, I think, is also really rare. So to explore the collection and to think about, my own interest is just kind of such a treat, and it's a little bit selfish too, right? As we developed kind of these clusters along the way, as we developed these different proposals that we eventually shared to you and other members of the Westmoreland Museum, to think about, my own interests in still life and portraiture, the global circulation of luxury goods, and to put concepts together around that was just a really exciting thing to be able to do, in addition to the kind of virtual remote environment and the issues that Emily and Janina touched upon.
That's really great. Yeah, we appreciate that. Olivia.
So once again, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Mona, for having us. And I would like to mostly echo what the others have said. Working digitally was definitely a challenge, but also for me, it was a really great thing because I was unable to attend the class synchronously. So it was really nice to be able to go back and listen to everyone's discussions and see that even though I couldn't be a part of it. Also as an undergrad, it was just really excellent to get to work with this group of grad students and like see their practice and see how they work, and their writing skills in general was really inspiring to me and definitely helped me to push myself to want to be up at that level. And also to echo Katie, I would say that this is definitely the most freedom I've ever had working on an exhibition, especially from my experience. It's usually we come with a topic and we pick works that kind of fit in the topic, but it was really interesting to start with the collection and go through like everything that you guys have up on your website and try to make connections between those objects, and then trying to make the connections between the connections that everybody had made. It was just a super interesting experience and so invaluable.
Well, it was for us as well, and I'm pleased that you enjoyed the sort of open access, because that's really what we wanted to share with all of you. So you mentioned some disadvantages, but I'd like to hear if there a few of the advantages potentially. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. COVID has pushed us into a digital realm, but I think it's also one of the positives that's come out of this, that we are learning to work in this realm, and there's a lot more, I think, potential and possibilities in this area for curating. But so tell me a little bit about some advantages and disadvantages that you saw in this experience. And we can go in the same order. We'll start with Emily.
Sure. I mean, to echo Katie, the greatest advantage was the level of access that we had. I have to say that this is the experience of working with your collection digitally allowed me to be more immersed in a collection than I think I've ever been or could ever have been, dealing with the physical realities of storage, of being on site, of offsite storage. So that level of access was and immersion was really quite the advantage. So was the element of play, to be able to pair things together, to kind of free think through the collection in a way that is a little bit harder to do in person as well. The other real advantage, I think, of this was in particularly a credit to Professor Taylor, but he had us do a number of exercises in curatorial writing collectively. So working in a singular document together to work through ideas, to work through phraseology, was a really exciting and authentic way to collaborate in a writing practice that is, at least to my experience, really new and something that I really hope to carry forward, because that kind of collaboration is more difficult when you're working in a more isolated space. So I really hope to carry that practice forward.
Janina.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Emily just said. I think the kind of, of course, the access and the kind of freedom that we had was really great, because it allowed us to really just start from wherever we wanted and then to come together and create something more cohesive. And I think that this emphasis on collaboration, not just in like working on documents together the way that Emily said, but just collaboration in general, that was really made easier by being digitally. We're in different places and different time zones, and so that helped to be able to know, okay, we're just going to be working virtually. And we had class meetings where we came together, but it was, in some ways, I think there was less pressure when we were working collaboratively through email or through Google Documents, things like that. I think that yeah, this digital format allowed us to have a different sort of collaboration that I think we're all getting used to in this new digital environment. But it was nice to see how that worked and then came out in such a great final product.
Okay, Katie, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, again, to echo Emily and Janina, I think the surprising thing about this was the extent to which we were able to collaborate in the digital space. To have, as Emily mentioned, she's not in Pittsburgh right now, and we were able to have her voice and ideas in the room, and Olivia being not able to attend our meetings at the same time as everyone else was still able to participate in different ways. So the digital space just allows for that in ways that everyone being physically together might not always allow for. And I think something else about the kind of advantage of this collaboration that we've done was a credit to Professor Taylor as well, where it wasn't all 15 of us or 12 of us collaborating together at one time. We had, a kind of scaffolded assignments where we were able to explore the collection ourselves. Then we're able to work in smaller groups of 3 to 4 people and then come together at the end to work on pattern makers, right? So there was that kind of level, which was a real advantage. Advantage I found. A challenge to that, I will say, is the fact that we didn't get to spend time with objects.
Yeah.
You don't know how large something is, how much of a wall it's going to take up. That kind of getting the intimate nature of curating, of getting to know the objects in the gallery spaces in which these objects are hung, there's just kind of a disconnect. So you might want to have a pairing that just won't work, right? Or there are quilts in the show and various things, and you don't know how it's going to hang because you don't know the material. And so there are just those kinds of practical challenges, which, we were fortunate, Barbara, to have you, who does have this intimate collection and knowledge and are able to make those kind of decisions. But, you might be really excited about an idea and then just kind of realize, well, no, that may not work or something like that.
Right.
Which is a challenge.
You're right, absolutely. There are all those challenges, but they're all good ones to work through. So Olivia, since you weren't able to attend the classes in person, did you find advantages to this virtual aspect of the curating this exhibition?
Yes, absolutely. It was super helpful that it was digital for me, especially. And just the accessibility of being digital is just lovely because we were able to coordinate times that we could meet outside of class. That was super helpful for me. And working on like Google Docs and things like that all together, all being able to collaborate in one document is definitely a plus. As for disadvantages, I definitely would echo Katie and say that not seeing the objects firsthand is definitely tough, especially getting to know scale and texture, and sometimes even like the brightness of colors can be off.
Right.
Also, just understanding the space is tougher when you're obviously working digitally, because most of us, I mean, I've never been to the Westmoreland. Also, I guess sort of a tangent, disadvantage would be that many of us haven't seen the show in person yet. Luckily, I will get the chance to go this weekend, but many of us haven't actually had the chance to see it, which is sort of sad, but also exciting that we have this digital space because many of us can go to the online exhibition, see it online, see the pictures that you guys have put up. So.
Yeah. And we did create an animation of it. My assistant Bonnie did that, and Jackie animated it for the website. So you can actually take a virtual tour of the show, which is really a good thing. And Emily's right, you're all right, that you couldn't possibly see all the objects. If you came out here to look at everything, you wouldn't have seen as many, I don't think, as you did actually through the database. So that made that, I think, a lot more accessible. But the scale is an issue, and I think in some cases we see that in the exhibition, but we kept those scale issues because the works related so well together. So for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition yet, when you come, I think you'll notice those, and you can see see probably a few of them behind me, but they relate to each other so well that it was not, we agreed not to change that connection because the connection was so great. So I am going to move on to how did you make your final selections? And I know we're getting ready to talk about the all three of the concepts that were proposed for an exhibition, but and you don't all four have to answer this, but did you collaborate on the actual selections, or did you each make a list and then so bring those lists together? And because I know you worked from a very large list from the database. So one of you can answer that? Who wants to? Nobody wants to answer that.
I'm happy to
Okay,
speak a little bit
Janina.
about it.
Okay.
Katie mentioned that that we had kind of these scaffolded assignments, and that for me was really helpful in, there's so much work in the database online that it is a little overwhelming. It's exciting, but it was definitely a little overwhelming. And so these scaffolded assignments helped at least me to kind of narrow my focus and to go from the macro and then really see what I wanted to focus on in both the kind of clusters that we proposed, which were groupings of works with kind of very brief exhibition ideas, nothing super fully formed. I have an image later on that I can show as well about how I kind of structured those clusters. And then from there, we did that kind of individually. And then from there, we were put into smaller groups and we came up with these three exhibition proposals that we're all going to talk about in a few minutes. And then together we all, with you, Barbara, came up with the final idea. And so I think this kind of, narrowing of focus in terms of works was really useful. And again, to Professor Taylor, his scaffolding of the assignments in order to guide us in that direction was really helpful.
Well, that leads us then right into the three exhibition proposals. And so I'm going to go to Katie and Emily first. You were part of the team that created the exhibition Proposal Objects and Imperial Projects. So if you can explain that concept to us.
Sure. So this concept really comes from a lot of the key issues that Katie and I work on in our individual dissertations. But the crux of it is that we were interested in thinking about issues of taste, issues of consumption, and issues of power and materiality. So, for example, if you go to the next, Katie, do you want to speak to I think your interpretation of the silver actually offers a really nice insight into what we were thinking around this concept.
Yeah, so with, for example, this kind of silver tea set here, we were thinking of issues of refinement, taste, refinement and taste in the final objects and the ways that it would have been used in the United States in earlier colonial North America. And then also thinking about the actual extraction of silver itself and the kind of labor involved in that, the extraction of natural resources, the exploitation of bodies and labor that are kind of hidden by the object and its sense of refinement itself. And then also this kind of double connection with this is a tea service, right? So the buying into the movement of tea, and again, those natural, the use of natural resources, exploitation of labor. And so we were really interested in this kind of idea of how we might uncover what is actually hidden by the object through fine craftsmanship, through metalworking, through refinement and civility, and the issues of power that are at play there, and how we might uncover that.
Okay, so we'll keep moving through this presentation because we've got 10 slides to go. So brief discussion.
Yes, I don't think we need to speak to all 10 slides. But for example, you see a tobacco store figurine. You're also seeing a number of landscape portraits or landscapes of New England port cities. When they're beautiful, they're pleasant to look at, and in that kind of easy viewing, we are of course obscuring the brutal histories of slavery that were integral to those ports and the circulation of bodies and goods in the United States. So just kind of we wanted to just push and think about what's beyond the object, what's beyond the surface, what kind of power relationships are in the materials themselves, or the materials represented.
And here again, a lot of those same issues, shifting our focus to materials as well, especially like the use of mahogany in this table and piano as well, and considering those histories of the use of slave labor, indigenous knowledge systems, and the ways in which those were used by early American traders, and then kind of forgotten in the domestic sphere to a certain extent.
Yes, and here we were thinking about, there's kind of two separate conversations here. One thinking about the symbolic role of jewelry and pearls in self-fashioning. And then you also have the environmental devastation that occurs through the use of women's furs and feathers in 20th century hat making, and even before that. So, yeah.
And then, yeah, we were also thinking of imperialism as a kind of key concept. And so one of those things we normally think of in terms of expansion and territorial expansion. And we're also curious about the ways that consumption plays into imperial relationships, both a kind of visual and material culture of empire, and the ways in which that was manifested primarily around the turn of the 20th century, and how the movement of goods and capital contributed to U.S. imperialism and kind of these objects.
So we've moved into the portion of the slides that we brought to the table that were just examples of some of the early clusters that we were using to work through very early ideas of thinking through the collection, thinking of themes, thinking of visual relationships, thinking about thematic relationships. And so Katie and I just brought a few of those to show some of our very early thinking. I was kind of interested in the idea of the element of desire in male portraits, and thinking about the pageantry of male military uniforms here. This was another very early concept. We were in the midst of quarantine, and a lot of the images that I was seeing in the collection were resonating in a new way. Thinking about thinking of the work from home desk, and my new interest in house plants and baking, and also thinking through what an incredible privilege it was to be in a position to be able to be quarantining safely, and to be having the opportunity to entertain myself during this period, when so many people didn't have or weren't able to do that. And so this was just an early kind of thinking through how the collection might resonate differently after the COVID experience.
Yes, so this was one of my early concept ideas, just this kind of initial stage of exploring the collection and pulling out things that caught my attention, and developing different concepts. So American imperialism was something that stood out to me and came into one of the concepts that Emily and I pitched to the museum as well.
Okay.
And then this is another early concept. I have this love of still life painting, and was really drawn to this kind of relationship between subject and object in still life and portraiture, and kind of exploring materiality and representation within the collection.
Okay, so this actually, yeah, I'm mute myself. Okay, so Janina, you were a member of the team that developed this concept, Unseen Works, Unseen Past. So can you walk us through that process?
Of course. So I have here an image of an early cluster that I worked on, so this was based on, it was called Building the Collection 2010 to 2020. And this cluster was kind of conceived of in the style of the exhibitions that the Westmoreland calls Building the Museum, which show upcoming gifts to the museum. So my idea with this exhibition would be a reflection on the collecting practices of the museum over the past decade and how they're expanding, how the Westmoreland is expanding their collection. And we can go to the next slide, thinking about this idea of unseen works, unseen pasts. So this exhibition proposal was developed in collaboration with my colleagues Vuk Vukovic and Annie Abernathy. And we had all worked on clusters. I didn't include an image of them, but we had all worked on clusters that thought about the creation of American identity. And so we really wanted to think about how our national identity has been shaped by certain kind of privileged ideas and stories, which ultimately narrow the definition of American and who that term includes. We can go to maybe the next slide. So this exhibition was intended to open a dialogue about the construction of American history, and we kind of started with some of the landscape images and this glorification of these pure idyllic landscapes, which don't fully acknowledge the violence and destruction that has been justified by principles like manifest destiny and Western expansion. And so we really worked on bringing in other works that could provide a different narrative and provide a different representation of the past, and really focus on things that have been erased. So we included imagery of heroes, whether here we see some folkloric characters. We also included images of national figures and local laborers. And we were thinking about this idea of heroes and how foundational it is to cultural memory and identity in the United States. And we were thinking about all of these figures. We can go through the next couple of slides. We were thinking about all of these figures and how they were presented as either role models or enemies, depending on how they've been written into our kind of accepted national narrative. So our goal with this exhibition proposal was really just to think about this creation of American identity and think about how we can think more expansively about what it means to be American.
Thank you, Janina. And those two proposals will not be abandoned, because we are working on a new interpretive plan for the permanent collection, and we'll be reinstalling all the galleries in the future. So both of these concepts really will work so well with interpreting these objects in the collection and taking our visitors, to another level, I think, of understanding and seeing, these objects. So Olivia, last but not least here, you are a member of the team that came up with the concept, the work of pattern in American art, and this was the concept that was formalized into the full-scale exhibition, Pattern Makers. 67 objects were selected, and that's what you're seeing, some of them, a view of them behind me in the Cantilever Gallery. So can you tell us a little bit about the original concept, and we'll go through these slides, and I think some of the imagery will still be the same as what was in your proposal.
Okay, so yeah, I worked on Pattern Makers with Isaiah Bertagnoli and Alan Landon, and originally we really thought of pattern kind of in the most basic and obvious way, works that were patterned, and also use these in conjunction with more abstract patterns and abstract works. And then we sort of moved into patterns that were occurring in nature, starting to consider trees, clouds, and patterns in the grass more than just obvious pattern, which sort of leads to the next connection, which is broadening the theme into including works that were not patterned in themselves, but were energized by the inclusion of pattern within the work. Maybe go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a great example of patterns in nature and sort of the conjunction with patterns in abstraction. So we really didn't see this connection until we saw these next to each other. And if you would see them one by one, you might not even think that they would have such a formal resemblance, but this was kind of the sort of connections that we were trying to make. Maybe next slide. So here's another great example of patterns in nature. As you can see on the bottom one, there's really interesting patterns in the land and the grass and in the clouds in the sky. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, when we broadened it to include patterns, works that included pattern, we sort of started including leisure scenes. And for instance, a good example of this is the beach scenes by William Henry Clapp that depict striped umbrellas. I'm not sure if they're in here.
Yeah, they're there.
Sorry. Oh, yes. Oh, this is also an excellent installation shot. As you can see, we sort of have the pattern going on in the wall, juxtaposing with the abstract pattern next to some natural and recognized pattern within a painting. So sort of a lot of themes in one right here. So after we started thinking, broadening to include works that were including pattern, we started thinking about who is behind these patterns and artists as pattern makers in themselves. And for me, this really came out of looking at the quilts that are included in the exhibition, which I think might have a photo in here.
No, we don't.
But many times patterns are used and followed to make works of art, such as in these quilts, which also sort of broadened our conversation about labor in general and started the conversation of art versus craft and folk art, which, as you can see here, some great examples of folk art that's included in the exhibition, which really also brought us to ideas of whose work is recognized and whose is not, which ultimately broadened the theme more than I think any of us originally imagined. Mm-hmm. So in the end, we sort of ended up with three main groups: patterns of abstraction, which you can sort of see on the left of this image, and patterns of nature, such as in Stanley's Traveler, and the Long Live the Virgins painting, and patterns of labor, as you can see very well in the first slide I think you had, Barbara. So in these works, we sort of opened with this because we thought this would be sort of the hardest concept to grasp, but as these are depictions of pattern makers in themselves. So the works themselves are not actually very patterned, but they're thinking of the people that are the labor that's going into making patterns, and the artists as pattern makers in themselves.
Okay, thank you, Janina. If you could go to the last slide, Maggie. there. So, so you're basically seeing what I'm sitting in front of, but I also think that this is really was it was a sort of expected pairing of two objects. This is a postage stamp quilt laying below John Griot's, one of his mosaic paintings from the 1950s, and the quilt is from the 19th century. And it's made up of thousands of little patches of fabric, and it really does echo the painting, and probably nearly a century apart. And I really love the idea that the students wanted to show this looking down on it, as if you might look at it if it were on a bed, because it's a very utilitarian object. But then you look up to make the relationship to the griot, and so I think it's really effective pairing, and it also is a little bit of a punctuation point to the exhibition. So I installed it at the very end of the gallery, and so really you come upon it as a bit of a surprise, I think, and I think it's it's almost that sort of final pairing that you really then appreciate and really, I think, get what the entire concept of this exhibition is. And these are the two images that we use in all our PR and marketing for this show too. So this I thought was really successful, and it's something that we would really like to continue to do. It focuses more eyes on the collection with really, I think, successful stories that came out with all of you looking at it, so differently, and then collaboratively, and being able to talk about it and bring these ideas to fruition. So we really appreciate all of the efforts that you made to make this exhibition a reality, and all of the efforts that went into the other two concepts as well. So do any of you have anything else you want to add to? Since all 12 of you and all 4 of you here worked on the final concept, do you have anything you might want to add about that? All right then. Well, we can open this up to audience questions if we have any. Do we have any, Mona?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a few audience questions, so I'll just get right to it. The first one comes to us from Adriana. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. What advice do you have for those interested in curating exhibitions or exhibits virtually? So I think anybody can jump in when they feel the urge to do so.
I guess one of the first things that comes to mind is finding a generous partner. This project and our incredibly positive experience with it isn't possible without the Westmoreland allowing us into the collection the way that they did. So yes, I would recommend enthusiastic and generous partners as part of your curatorial digital curating experience.
All right, excellent. Anyone else want to add?
Maybe some practical advice would just be to pay attention to the scale that's listed in the catalog before you are shocked by it later.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. I remember seeing the exhibition in the thumbnail images, and then actually visiting the museum to see it, and then seeing the piece that, and I'm blanking on the name, but the incredibly large contemporary white boxes.
Oh, still
yes.
Damiano.
Seeing that in person was incredible.
Yeah.
Because in a thumbnail, it's literally the size of a thumb. So, all right, that's my side note. Another question from Adriana. Also, as curators shift to digital platforms, what would you say are the advantages and disadvantages for viewers to seeing exhibitions online only? Sorry.
I can speak to this a little bit. I mean, I think that one of the advantages of seeing exhibitions online, but also things like this, like public programming now being online, is just the accessibility that comes with it. it means I know that I personally have attended more public programs in the last year because of this kind of Zoom virtual environment than I ever would have been able to in person. And that has been a real treat. And the same thing with seeing exhibitions. Of course, it's a completely different experience viewing it online than really being there with the work. But I have gotten to absorb a lot more in the last year. So I would say that's one of the biggest advantages of this.
And to just add on to Janina's point here, I think for museums as well, you can think of your audience in a much broader and wider capacity where you don't have the same geographical barriers, economic barriers, or even just time barriers. People can look digital exhibitions when the museum isn't open, which allows you to reach more people and to have more engagement.
Excellent. All right. So our next question, and Barbara, you may be able to help answer this one. Which database does the Westmoreland use that makes remote digital access possible? How does this differ from the public-facing Explore the Collection function of the website?
Well, we use Embark database, which is a gallery systems database. It's a smaller scale. They have a larger version for larger collections, but this is a smaller scale database that really is suited, to our collection. It is tied in a kiosk format to the website, so everything that Doug Evans, adds to the database, with the exception of the proprietary information and the confidential information, everything is able to be seen on the website. So he's working diligently to get the entire collection, professionally photographed. We have images, I think, of about everything on there, but not everything is quite as high resolution so that you can, see it as clearly and blow it up and do all those kind of things with it. But yeah, no, Embark is the database, and it's out of California, and we've had it, in place for almost as long as I've been here, probably since 1996.
Well, thanks for that, Barbara. We have a question from Diana. Given current restrictions, did you think about how visitors might view the exhibition online while you were curating virtually?
Olivia, you might be able to speak to this in a slightly different way, but from my perspective, the exhibition was always going to have a physical component, and so we weren't thinking about it in exclusively digital terms. At least that was my approach. I don't know if the rest of you agree.
I definitely agree with you. I actually really focused a lot on the physical exhibition, including thinking about where things were placed and Alex discussing the colors of the walls with us and etc. So I really did not focus much of my efforts on thinking of the online exhibition.
I agree with that. Like, we knew that there was always going to be a physical component, but I do wonder if, because our initial engagement, and for some of us who haven't been to the Westmoreland to see the exhibition yet, all of our engagement has been virtual with the collection and then with developing this exhibition. And so I wonder if that has actually translated in some ways to viewing the exhibition digitally as well.
All right. I appreciate that. Okay, so next question. How would the exhibition be different for the curators if the exhibition was also a digital-only experience and not displayed at the museum? Well, I think that's a double question. So my mistake. So you answered it. Here we go. We're going to move on. All right. next question is, what are each of your takeaways from the experience, and how will this help you in the future?
I think that I spoke to this a little bit in the beginning, but I think it was definitely one of the biggest takeaways for me was starting with a collection and rather than a concept, and working off of that to create an exhibition rather than the other way around, as well as developing my personal writing and making my writing more concise and well worded for short texts like wall texts and proposals and such.
I would agree with Olivia here. We're starting with a collection. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was over the course of this practicum, seeing how many different kind of exhibition ideas and proposals were put forward from one collection, and thinking about a permanent collection and the type of things you can do with that, where you're not relying on loans and various things. I just found it really rewarding and really exciting. And, you know, I'm excited for the other things that are going to come at the Westmoreland, as well as the opportunities at other collections, and what possibilities might arise from that.
I couldn't agree more. There's the wonderful experience of being immersed in a collection is something that I will absolutely carry forward, as will the incredible spirit of collaboration that happened here. This was a level of collaboration that was definitely new in the curatorial process for me, and I'm looking forward to carrying it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what everyone has said, especially the emphasis on collaboration. Not only within our class, but with the Westmoreland. I think this has just been a great experience on how we can collaborate despite all of these other extenuating circumstances. And I think also having this experience, and I think I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but having this experience of curating digitally so early on in my career, and knowing that this is how things are going to keep being in some capacity. So having kind of done that a little bit already, I feel comfortable moving forward doing that.
All right, I think that's it for our questions. So I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I really appreciate everything you've contributed. It has been really wonderful to see the exhibition and what you all put together. Thank you, Barbara, Emily, Katie, Olivia, and Janina.
Yes, and thank you all. It's been a real pleasure to work with all of you. So I wish you every success in what you're planning to do in the future. And come see us, please, when you can.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I wanted to also thank our members, our museum staff, and a big thank you to everyone that joined us. Please make sure you check the museum's website at thewestmoreland.org for upcoming virtual programs. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening.